why do you think so many people feel like life is happening to them rather than shaping it themselves? And how do you think they can take back control of their life this year?
Yeah, man. It's like really, it's because we live most of our lives without being self-aware. Like we're relatively aware, but we're not self-aware and mindful in the moment. No one teaches us how to do that. And so as we're growing up as kids and we're kind of learning who we are, we're learning what the world is like, et cetera, things just kind of happen around us. Like life just has the chance that, it unfolds. And so things kind of happen. And then as we move into adulthood, that continues to occur. It's like we sort of just are trying to, in some ways, we're on autopilot. And we're trying to kind of figure out things as we go. And we're really not slowing down, practicing this sense of mindful awareness so that we can be conscious of what we're doing and the actions and, choices that we're making in our lives. And so all of that chance that's happening and unfolding around us, I think it gives us the appearance that a lot of things aren't in control, because we'll look at it and we'll be like, oh, well, this is what life is, whenever really it's just what we've gotten used to. It's like we've normalized kind of the randomness and our own autopilot nature. And then the story and the narrative in our mind has then led us to believe that that's all that there is. But once you start to create some space in that and practice some sense of, mindfulness and increase your self-awareness, you begin to see that, once you start paying closer attention, then you have better intentionality in your daily life. And that's how you start actually making the changes that you want and seeing the results that you want.
You mentioned a couple of things there, like one, like that people just at times tend to coast through life, no self-awareness, no understanding of their own behaviors, their own wants, their own desires, values, etc. And then also like to develop, some practice to help gain self-awareness, whether it be mindfulness or something else. And I think people get stuck there because they hear terms like self-awareness and it's like, well, how do I become more self-aware? And then to add more complexity to that, if people are coasting, it sometimes takes a drastic event for them to realize, like, oh, like I'm the common denominator in all of my problems, and that's why my life is a mess. So, what steps do you think somebody can take to begin to cultivate self-awareness without having to experience like rock bottom in life?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is it does feel complicated for a lot of people. But yeah, meditation obviously is really helpful because that's a slow, gradual way for you to begin noticing your mind, watching your mind, noticing the thoughts that are arising, notice the reactions and sort of the behavior loops and patterns that you keep, executing again and again and again. If someone isn't into meditation, I would say just simply becoming conscious of paying attention to your thoughts, like consciously spending more time paying attention to what you're thinking, paying attention to the story that's going through your mind, and contrast that with reality. Like, what can you actually verify about the narratives in your mind? Like you said, people don't like this sense of that in some ways because it can make them feel like they have to take responsibility, and that responsibility is uncomfortable for them. And, that's why people hate, like I posted something one time that was like, things improve once you realize that your life is the result of your choices, and people don't really like to hear that a lot of times. But yeah, if you start paying attention to that, you will begin to notice like, okay, I see that I'm thinking in this moment X, Y, and Z. And then as you continue kind of going on and on, you just spend that time intentionally paying attention to what's arising in your mind. You start to get more acquainted with what you're thinking in the present moment. And then ultimately what that translates to is that you're able to then in situations be aware of what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and therefore how you're acting in the present. And that is how you start actually cultivating some change and difference, because you have this sovereignty over your own thoughts and your own actions, and therefore who you are becoming.
And I think that people, like you mentioned that quote that, people off, and, I'm sure that comes from, well, my circumstances, I couldn't help, and therefore I made these decisions based on that. And I think what happens is you begin to cultivate this negative frame of mind towards your outlook on life based on your circumstances. And because of that, you begin to act in accordance to that frame of mind, and you self sabotage and destruct like other areas of your life. How can people begin to reframe those thoughts in moments where it feels like not only it feels like the results are proving to them that their life is falling apart?
Yeah, I think really, like, for example, if you think, oh, I don't feel good about myself, or I'm not like attractive, I don't have any visual value, then you can reframe that in a couple of ways. It's like you can go, well, maybe I just haven't put in the effort to look like what I want to look like yet. Maybe I don't feel good about it yet. Instead of just, here's the fact, like, I'm unappealing, this sucks. It's like you can do a lot with exercise, dieting, just kind of getting the good, getting the look together, stuff like that. And instead of just being like, oh, this sucks, this is the end all be all, be like, okay, I'm not where I'm at yet, but let's move towards that. And then you can start kind of identifying like, well, let me get a fit together real quick. Let me do a little bit of research, see what style I like, maybe buy a couple new things. Let me change up my, get some grooming, some manicuring, start hitting the gym, whatever, and just turn that ship around. And then the beautiful part of that, after you do that reframe is then, in a couple of months, you notice, oh, you're feeling better, you're looking better, you're achieving your goal. And you can look back at that and be like, oh, I actually recognized something that I was upset with and unhappy with in life. I understood it. I took the time to understood it. I figured out a way to make that change. And then now I'm seeing the results. And that's cool. That's a great thing to do, because what it does is it teaches you that you can make changes, and, not just in one area, but just in your life in general. And it breaks that normalization of kind of being stuck, like we were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah. And I think that one of the other reframes that's crucial for people to make is escaping the victim mindset. And I think that goes into what you talked about earlier, in that let's face it, like, there's people who grow up in horrific circumstances, and I'm not taking anything away from that. But I think ultimately what people want in those situations is to feel like their life is going to be okay, and to feel like they're going to be able to still have, success, fulfillment, happiness that everybody else with better circumstances, can achieve. How do you think people can begin to reframe that mindset? Because I think if you're stuck in the victim mindset for the rest of your life, it'll give you the exact opposite of what you're actually looking for.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, in the victim mindset's a tricky one. Like you said, like, obviously people come from really horrific backgrounds, so they can, but a lot of times, man, it's just a kind of a form of bypassing. It's like they don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to put in the effort. They don't want to figure it out. And it's easier to be a victim, because then if you play this victim role, then you kind of become uncriticizable in this way in your own mind too. And then you can be outraged, whenever someone tries to tell you or help you even, you can be sort of like, find some moral high ground, and then you ultimately don't have to take action once again. So it's a kind of dangerous place to live, But I would say, just be honest. Like, if you're in this victim mindset, you're like, oh, everything is happening to me. Life is happening to me, and I can't do X, Y, and Z. Just be like, okay, and let's just be present with what is. Like, here's what is. Maybe it's not great. Maybe I didn't have the best circumstances starting, but here we are. Now, where can I go from here? And I think that just looking at reality, like, let's look at all this of just, here's the playing field. Everyone has a different one. Here's mine. Cool. Now, how can I change this? Where are the opportunities and whatnot? Instead of just being like, oh, I'm overwhelmed and kind of just fawning in response to the story I have that, nothing's in my control.
Right. And I think there's this Jordan Peterson quote that really hit me after my buddy told it to me. It was about a month ago during a podcast interview. He was sharing some insights to help the audience. And it said, if your life is not what it could be, try telling the truth. And that's a really hard hitting quote, because I think it's tough to accept, because, like you said, like, people grow up in really horrific situations. And what's also true is people don't take responsibility for how they behaved in response to that situation. Right. And they have a hard time doing so. And I think a lot of times what happens this is my own personal experience, is when you feel really low about yourself and your life is just not where you think it could be. And you're like, man, I wish I would have done things differently. I have all this potential. The idea of you admitting like harsh truths about your role in your life is super, super hard. But I think on the other side of that comes massive freedom, because now you're essentially, it's ripping the band-aid off and being like, all right, like I see what's going on here, and now I can start to work through this.
Absolutely, man. It's like that's the key to being able to grow as a person is like close the gap between, the stories that you're telling yourself and reality. Close the gap. See reality for what it is. And it may not be like pleasant at first, but eventually it'll be awesome because you're going to actually get somewhere. And that's one of the things about, if you live in this kind of delusional fantasy world about yourself or just the world in general, it's very frustrating and confusing. It's because the moves that you're making aren't connecting with life because you're not thinking and experiencing life for what it is. You're experiencing sort of this other story about it. And so all of the moves that you're making are landing because you're not like in touch with what's real. And so it makes it really hard. And I mean, the other thing about the victim thing is like, man, like we all, like everyone has their challenges and suffering is relative, and the majority of people, particularly listening to this podcast, probably did not come from horrendous backgrounds. You know what I mean? They probably had just like relatively normal lives. That's why that's why they're called normal. It's like the majority of people. And it's like everyone has suffering. It's like, some people have emotional suffering that they had to deal with when they were kids. Some people had good, healthy households, but then they deal with like imposter syndrome because they feel like, well, I had it all, but now when I go out into the world, now I can't break through and whatever. It's like, you'll always find something that sucks and that you're having to suffer through. That's just something that kind of is a part of the human condition. It's not really about what like the thing you're dealing with is. It's about how you respond to it and what you do with it and the kind of the moves that you make and the actions that you take to shift it and to change that story and to start kind of being the person that you want to be.
Do you think it takes like practice, like going through these situations and practicing like the reframe of mind, like during the hardship and then moving through those to be able to kind of change the rewiring of your brain so that it becomes second nature? Like for example, for me, like, I went through a lot of hardship years ago. And because of me like shifting my mindset around that and practicing like going through hard things without taking shortcuts, now when I go through hard things, like it's just second nature for me to just keep going without feeling sorry for myself. I mean, so do you think that people need to do something like that? Or do you think they can just like tell themselves like to suck it up and switch things up and to prepare for going through hardship?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a case by case basis. It's like I'm pretty like meta programmery of my mind where I can sort of flip a switch and be like, okay, I'm doing this now. But I know that not everyone operates like that. And I'm not saying that's better or worse. It's just kind of how I am. But yeah, I mean, I think most people probably need just some repetition. They need a little bit of practice and training. And, because if your mind has grown to operate and think in certain patterns over your entire life, if you're 25, you're 35, 45 years, then it's going to take some time to readjust. But like you said, it's like, going to the gym or something like that, or any skill that you're going to be practicing. Like, you're not going to go run a marathon the day you decide to start running. You're going to walk a mile, run a mile, walk a mile, run a mile. And then maybe the next week you'll run 2 miles and then walk a mile. And so then you'll continue growing. And this type of stuff, like the mental dynamics, is the same thing. It's like once you start building that mental muscle of reframing, shifting your mindset and what have you, then it becomes a lot easier, not only because you're used to just sort of the internal like consciousness economics of the situation, but also with each time you do it, you are building your confidence. You're proving that you can do it because you just continue to see results time after time that it works. And so that resistance of being like, well, like, let me try and look at it this way. And I don't know. I hope that you're just like, yeah, I can do this. Let me I'm in a bad mindset. Let me flip it around and let me, move forward.
And I think a lot of that comes down to like being able to get like radically honest with yourself. And, there's people that when they hear the word personal development, self-awareness, changing their mindset, they get kind of turned off because like, well, what if I don't want to be this person that reads books and listens to podcasts and, works on myself? Like, what if I'm just okay, just coasting through life? And what I say to that is like, hey, if you're radically honest with yourself and you're like, you know what, I'm happy just being average, being status quo, and not potentially like wanting more for yourself, like, by all means, like, I'm not going to tell you to do anything different. But I think the problem becomes so many people are so afraid of being radically honest with themselves, and then, taking that leap to take those steps to like step into that new version of themselves, that they just don't do it. And then they make an excuse and they say things like, I hate personal development, or those people are just too positive, or whatever the case may be. Like, in your opinion, like, what is the danger of somebody just coasting through life?
I mean, there's no danger to it. It's like, if that's what a person wants to do, if they're cool just coasting through life, then they'll live and they'll die. I mean, it's like, that's what it is. It's all good. It's fine. I think that, you know, depending on a person's predilection towards life, they might miss out on a lot of richness of what's available in life. And I think that that's something that I really try and focus on in the things I write and talk about. I know you mentioned kind of people that have an allergy towards personal development. I have an allergy towards personal development. I think so much of it is just kind of soft and pandering and weak and just kind of lame and whatever. But also there's a lot of it that is powerful and transformative and whatever. And I think you just got to find the right person or the right people that like are your vibe, that can get you, motivated and get you to where you want to go. And in terms of the, it's funny, as you mentioned the positivity too, it's like, I'm not super positive. I'm not really worried about being positive. I'm worried about being realistic. I'm concerned about, like you were saying, being radically honest and getting to that kind of core truth. And one of those things is that if you live on autopilot and you don't try, that's totally fine. Like, you'll live your life and you'll do your thing. You'll have your little ups and downs, all good. That's trillions of people have done that before you, but there's so much like available in this life, in the human experience, just in this present moment. Like, if you can move all of the mental chatter out of your mind, if you can let go of your idea of how you think your experience of reality should be right now, and you can actually sink into how reality truly is, there is this endless abundance of almost kind of psychedelic experience that you can have just by simply being present. And that richness turns into like this richness of compassion, of meaning, of purpose, of connection, of like self-trust and self-belief, of ease and sense of like peacefulness and calm and mental clarity. I mean, all that stuff is so powerful. And if you don't ever, scratch the surface of yourself, then you don't ever have access to that. And it's a shame. It's a kind of a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally on the same page with you. And I think that the self-help space has done people a disservice, in the sense where, self-love isn't just about feeling good about yourself. It's not just about patting you on the back and saying, do what you want and stand up for yourself. It's more like, are you disciplined? Like, do you actually follow through with what you say you're going to do? Do you live with integrity? Do you have self-awareness? Can you admit when you're wrong? Can you persevere during adversity? Like, that is like love, right? Is knowing that you love yourself enough to know that you deserve to walk through life in a certain way, and to not settle, and to not sell yourself short when you know you can be doing better. And people just, I think, by means of fear, and maybe this is like a subconscious fear, you know, hold themselves back. What do you think holds most people back from like taking that step, getting radically honest with themselves, and stepping into that version of themselves they know that they could become?
We're all just like ego laden monkeys, man. It's like we have these big egos. We don't want to see ourselves, like, we're programmed not to see our own faults. We're programmed to keep like moving forward and thinking that we are higher in the pecking order than we really are, because we're kind of from a ground up evolutionary psychology perspective, we're designed to continue thinking we're better than everyone else, which really is just an illusion, a trick that our mind and physiology has played on us, so that we can trick ourselves into believing that we are worthy enough to procreate. Essentially, that's really what's happening. And we don't want to, if you start to, cut into the system, you start hot wiring and hacking the system of the mind and the ego, then all that stuff starts going haywire and it can get really uncomfortable. And it takes a little bit of, practice and self-study to look inward and to be able to deal with seeing those, your own shortcomings or your own errors and actually being comfortable, like repositioning your relationship with them to where you're using them as tools. Like they're your friends. Like whenever you look at yourself and you're like, well, like I wish I wouldn't have done that. Like I was being a real back there. A lot of people don't want to see that because they're like, oh, well, no, I'm all good. I'm not an asshole. I wasn't in that situation. They're the ones that have the problem. It's like, no, that realization is actually your friend. That thing's trying to help you. And like, if you look at it like that, if you can learn from it and then you can broaden and enrich your dynamics and your communication, your relationships, which will make your whole life better, just as a simple example.
As somebody who's radically honest with yourself and has a high level of self-awareness, what are a few fears that you've had in the last several months, several years that you've had to overcome?
Nothing. No. Let's see. Yeah, fears I've had to overcome. Yeah, I think the thing, or maybe not fears, but it's like just sort of things that I struggle with in terms of my own work, my own writing, is I question like how can I like get to a more and more authentic place? How can I continue to like really lean into what we were talking about earlier in terms of like not falling prey to trying to give people what you think will work for them, as opposed to really getting in there and being like honest and authentic in a way that is maybe not super digestible. It's like those are the type of things work, and professional wise that I kind of am always thinking about and trying to get better at, and just removing the veils of all of that, and going deeper and deeper, getting towards something real. It's like I look at creativity and all the work is like sort of a artistic practice and all, because my background is in music and in composition. And so like, I'm kind of just mentally, I always look at everything as a creative work. And like, that's the same way. So I'm always trying to get deeper and deeper, with that. And yeah, I mean, in terms of like, I'm trying to think of a good fear or something like that I overcame or was faced with.
Or even like a limiting belief or something.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. It's like, whenever my last book came out, Brave New You, your brain goes a little haywire, and there's all sorts of different things that can kind of, messages and stories that pop up. And I'm not good at self promotion, and well, I shouldn't say that. I don't really like doing self promotion. I'm good at it. I just don't really like it that much. And whenever my book was the campaign was launching, there was definitely like some feelings of like, oh God, like, it feels a little gross. I just don't want to be like pitching myself to people all the time and just trying to essentially sell something, sell my ideas, sell myself, always be closing, in every conversation that I have. But then I stopped and, just had reflected on it for a minute. And it's like, yeah, this comes from me, it comes from a little bit of not enough self-love, in terms of like the way that you described it, giving your own permission to take up some space in the world, to in a different way, that you're not used to. And then also pivoting the perspective of like, if 500,000 people, follow me just on Instagram alone, and my stuff reaches like 8 million people a week, like people want to hear what I'm putting out in the world. Like the idea of self-promoting as it being something gross and something that I'm resistant to. It's like, no, actually, people, they follow my stuff because they like it. They'll be excited to hear what I'm putting out there. And it's not bad to, promote myself. It's bad if you do it in a gross way. And so it's like, that was sort of something that, in terms of just a limiting belief that I worked with earlier this year.
What do you think is the biggest lie people believe in the self-help space?
In the self-help space? Oh man, Let's see. Let's see. The biggest lie. That's a good question. I really like this. I'm trying to think of a good one. Probably that they can just, I mean, I'm going to just go with just from the hip. Probably like new age manifesting is pretty rough, I would say. Um, because the worst thing that like turns out your previous episode was like how to manifest. Yeah, sorry, buddy.
Was it?
No, I'm just
No, no,
joking.
no. I mean, I've talked about the science of manifestation on here, which was interesting, but I'm very against like what I think you're about to talk about.
Yeah, and I mean the actual like manifestation from a point of view of like of imprintation, self imprintation of like clarifying and visualizing your goal, and then so that way you know what you're going towards and you can continue taking the step towards that. That is good stuff. That's self-priming, self-implementation. But being like, if I just basically think of having, a Ferrari or whatever, then it's going to show up my driveway. That's not good. Like new age manifesting, because ultimately I think it's really bad because one of the harshest things that people can get caught up in is delusion. And that's why in Buddhism, the three poisons are anger, desire, and delusion. And delusion in that terminology basically means like you are seeing reality for what it isn't. You are completely in the story of your own assumption laden, fantasy based magical thinking, as opposed to being really in touch with what's real and what's objectively true. And so getting pulled into this world where you think you're just going to like think your perfect life into existence without actually doing anything, it just imputes a lot of suffering for people because it's confusing for them because they're like, oh, I'm putting in all this effort. I'm thinking of all of the I want, but nothing's happening. So then they start, suffering from that perspective as well. And it's not good.
Are you familiar with Case Kenny? You know Case?
Yeah. I think that name rings a bell. Yeah.
He said something on my show. I'm just really reflecting what you just said. He said, when you say you manifested something, it means you just did it. And that's like it in its simplest form is that you made the choices. You can have vision. You can like I'm all for like visualization and like being like, yeah, like this is what I want in my life, and here's how I'm going to take the steps to get there. I think that's very good. But the idea of I'm just gonna like wave my hands above my head, sit on my couch, and then the universe is gonna like place a Lamborghini in my driveway tomorrow when I wake up. Like I hope that people don't still believe that. I mean, maybe they do, but it traps people because now they have this idea that they don't have to necessarily work for things. They can just, pray, connect to the universe, whatever flavor of spirituality they like. And then all of a sudden, because they quote unquote deserve it, the universe is going to grant them that wish. Like it's not Aladdin, there's no genie here. And, and so, yeah, I mean, I totally am on board with you. And I think one of the other things that trips people up, and you mentioned this a few minutes ago about us just being egotistical, is that with the rise of the self-help space, and again, I think this idea is actually quite good. I just think there's a line with everything that you need to focus more on yourself, set boundaries, make sure that you're doing, what you want. I think there's a fine line between that and then just shutting everybody else out in your life and thinking you're right, not compromising, just being so obsessive with yourself that you don't have any kind of space to let anybody else in. And I think that tends to, at times, show itself during moments of adversity, where now when people are up and they're back, or when they have their back against the wall, all they can think about is themselves in that moment, and they're just kind of trapped, and they can't zoom out to look at like the bigger perspective of the world, their life, and stuff. And so I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on how people can just not be so obsessive about themselves and zoom out during hardship so they can get through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit on a case by case basis in terms of what someone's actually experiencing. But yeah, not being self obsessed is obviously very, very. Not only is it's healthy, but you're going to be happier if you're not self obsessed like that. If you're always just thinking about yourself all the time, then you're not ever going to be getting any type of external, like real external connection, you know, and that's where so much meaning and purpose comes from in our lives, is just our community and like our family, our friends, and people like that. And if you're just always, you know, in this sort of weird box of yourself, then you're never going to be able to experience that. And you're going to start feeling lonely and disconnected and unhappy, and probably coming up for more reasons why you should detach even further. And just will go, you know, on and on and on.
So this episode is brought to you by the Zona Plus, the ultimate biohack. The Zona Plus continues to be the biohacker's choice for full body cardiovascular conditioning. The Zona Plus uses the proven science of isometric therapy to help increase overall cardiovascular fitness. And the cool thing about Zona is it guides the user through a simple yet precise isometric exercise, which helps to encourage multiple functions in the body, which can help improve overall cardiovascular function. And the cool thing is it only takes 12 minutes a day, 5 minutes per week. And like I said earlier, the Zona Plus uses the science of isometrics and combines a hand grip exercise with a series of algorithms that can help activate the body's parasympathetic response, which is responsible for functions such as heart rate and cardiovascular fitness. It is the ultimate biohack, which I think you will really like. So right now, you can try the Zona Plus risk-free for 90 days. And if you use the code Doug100 at checkout, you get $100 off the Zona Plus device. So go to Zona.com and use the code Doug100 for $100 off and try the Zona Plus risk-free for 90 days. Yeah. And I think what happens is they don't, when you're so, I guess, you know, when you become so obsessive with yourself, then when you're going through hard times, you forget about the power of like reaching out to other people, or you end up, because of being self-absorbed, you burn bridges with people, and then your friend circle gets smaller and smaller, not for good reason, right? It's because people don't want to be around people like that. And then they forget the power of like being of service to other people during hard times and how that can help take your mind off of what you're going through. And I just think there's that saying that, whatever you've gotten through, everything that you've gotten through, right? And we tend to forget that going through hard times, right? Because we're so like zeroed in on what's in front of us in that moment. Is there like a mindfulness practice that you personally use when, like, let's just say, something extremely like painful happened in your life tomorrow? Let's just say all of a sudden, like, your half of your following disappeared on Instagram, and now you're like, crap. Well, I don't want to speak that into existence, but something pretty impactful for you personally and professionally happens, and you're forced to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What steps would you take?
Yeah, in moments like that, I always just start watching my mind. And I do that because I have experienced things like that. Like any professional, and particularly a solo entrepreneur, is going to experience those types of like twists and turns, because you're basically just like a person on a pirate ship out in the middle of the ocean trying to find your gold and do your thing, and you can get some weird surprises. And I use those moments to like reassess, to like, all right, this is a growth moment, and this is a moment for opportunity, as opposed to a moment of like just letting yourself fall to pieces and be punished. And so I start looking at my mind, and I just pay attention to what I'm thinking. And what I found is interestingly, whenever things don't work out the way that you are expecting them to, or you want them to, and growth is kind of, or change, I should say, is forced upon you, your mind will instantly start responding to that with like different trains of thought. It's like, it's always trying to fill in the gaps. It's going to come up with different angles on the situation. And if you can pay attention to that, you can actually see those are really fascinating opportunities, because it's a rare occasion in which your mind is thinking in that way. Because like those peak moments of joy, or those peak moments of discomfort or fear or whatever, like we don't spend much time in those places. And so when we are, our mind is thinking in a really unique way. And if you take advantage of that, you can get some fascinating ideas and get some real clarity and like new directions in which you can approach things in your life otherwise. And I found that a lot of times where, like, for example, like, whenever I did my podcast, was doing it for like almost 10 years or something like that at this point. And there was a lot of years where I relied on the advertising budget for, a majority of income. And then as the industry started changing and, there's more and more podcasts and the whole, kind of ad side of pods really started changing and becoming a lot more for the advertisers as opposed to for the podcasters. And they also started trying to like implement, different agencies started to implement things that I just didn't like, that I thought were gross. And I started thinking about also like, kind of, what am I doing here? Like, is this really what I want to be doing? Like being this like spokesperson for products, and like, is that what I want to be doing with my time? Does that feel good to me? And whenever, those things all started getting tighter and tighter, and a few things happened kind of in how like the advertising world operates that I was just getting really annoyed by. I stopped, and instead of being like, oh God, like, well, I have to keep doing this because this is a part of my income and whatever, I stopped and I literally just thought like, all right, let me observe my mind right quick. And let's think like, what do I wish I was doing more of rather than like reading advertisements for a podcast and do it all the time? What do I want to be doing more of? And what might I do and spend my energy on that would be more meaningful to me, where I could still, like have a comfortable income and living, but not be reliant on this? And that's actually whenever I started writing on Instagram every day, is because I thought, I really want to be writing more than I want to be podcasting. So I thought, let me just do a creative exercise and I'll just start writing one thing a day, just for fun, just to really get in there and enjoy it and whatever. And I started posting one thing a day on Instagram. And that was whenever I had like 10,000 followers or something like that, or, 15 or something. And within the space of, I think about a year, 6 months to a year, I went from having like 10,000 followers to having like 200,000. And it was all because of that moment where I was getting really frustrated with how the advertisement world and the podcasting world was going, how that was changing. And I took that opportunity to reassess, to do a little bit of self-inquiry, to move into a different direction, which I might not have done if things would have just kept going good enough, with the podcasting. And now I'm at a much, much happier place for it because I'm spending the majority of my time writing. And now I don't do any podcast ads anymore at all.
That's awesome, man. Congrats to you for making that shift and like following your heart. I think you mentioned something about the mind, like like watching where your mind goes during those moments. I think people have a hard time separating like logic from emotion. I think logic is really good for like making business decisions. Logic is really good for figuring out like the best workout routine. Logic is really good for making certain life decisions, right? Just budgeting, etc. But logic isn't necessarily like going to always work out in terms of relationships or stuff like that, where more emotion is required. And I think what happens is when something in life happens, like people's, I guess, primal instincts take over and they get super emotional about that thing. And they have a hard time like switching back and forth between logic and emotion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, just how I interpret it myself, but I'd love to hear not only your thoughts on that, but like anything you've done to kind of get yourself in a place to be able to efficiently switch back and forth between emotion and logic.
Yeah, that's a great question, man. I mean, I am naturally a low emotion, high logic person. I mean, surprise, surprise. And I think that, how I operate on that is I pay attention towards whenever I have to me, like emotion feels like something arising from the body almost, and thought feels like something coming from the mind. And like emotion almost maybe arises like from the center, from the stomach, and then goes up into, the chest, and then it kind of moves throughout your body. And there is wisdom in that. Like it is also another important type of sense that's trying to tell you something. I think that how I go between them is, and really I like them to kind of operate together. But how I would go between them is in moments like that where one is more needed than the other, or one would be more useful than the other. I intentionally tune into either of those spaces. So I'll pause, slow down, and I will go into my mind and pay close attention to like just the texture of what's flowing through there, and allow kind of intellectual, things to unfold that need to unfold into logic. And if I'm in a situation that calls for more emotional intelligence, I'll do the same practice, but I'll do it with the body as it's stopping, slowing down, pausing, and then noticing, like just observing what's arising, like what emotions, what feelings are arising from the body right now. What's here? What's coming up from the core, from the stomach, from the heart area? And like, what is it trying to tell me? And like listening to that intelligence, and it helps me kind of get into that zone and operate, from that place more balanced. And this all sounds kind of robotic, but it's only because I'm explaining it like systematically. But it should be a pretty natural process, and I think that if a person struggles from moving from logic to emotion, which I know some people do, or from emotion to logic, I would say just intentionally slowing down and focusing on either of those things that you're trying to kind of entrain yourself into can be really useful.
And I think one of the things that people get emotional over is overwhelm. And not just overwhelm with like doing a bunch of different things, but overwhelm where there's so much stimulus coming at them. Whether it's you got people who are, talking to them who are their friends, family, loved ones, coworkers, neighbors, social media, email, all this stuff. And they have a hard time like really getting not just clear. We've talked about getting clear on what truly matters and like how to develop awareness around changing yourself, but like how to take action on that and how to stay focused on that. Like, what are your tips for somebody who wants to really get like laser focused on focusing and achieving what truly matters?
Yeah, you just have to make the choice. Like you really gotta make the choice, man. And what that looks like is if you have something you're trying to achieve, you schedule the time in. Like every day, every morning, like what, however your life looks, but maybe in the morning, 2 hours on your schedule, uninterrupted time of working on that thing 5 times a week. It's like from, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. You're drinking a cup of coffee and you're doing that thing. And you don't have the phone out. You don't have, you don't have a bunch of browsers open. You don't have the TV on. You don't have whatever going on. You are there. You're focused. You're doing nothing but working on that thing for 2 hours a day. And that's what you got to do is like, as someone who's written a couple of books, it's like, you got to learn how to just block that time out. Like I'll do 4 hours whenever I'm writing a book. It's like 4 hours a day is like from, 8 a.m. to noon. There's nothing going on but me working on that writing. And like the cool thing about that space is that, man, it may seem a little like intense for someone at first, but it's just because your brain is used to skipping from like one stimulus to the next stimulus. You're looking at your phone, you're closing that app, you're opening this app, you're turning on a podcast, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing something around the house while you're listening to a pod. You're just always distracted. And so like the monkey mind is just like chattering and going all over the place. And so that's kind of what you're used to. But once you drop into the zone where you're like, all right, this is the 2 hours I'm working on my business, or I'm putting a plan together, or I'm doing whatever it is. It's like that time, once you get used to being in there and the mind sort of cools off and stops feeling fidgety and uncomfortable and everything, you can drop into this crazy deep zone, this flow state zone where you're now like 10xing the amount of like advancement that you're making in that time, because you have the space to really get in there and like go deep into this mindset and this, this kind of flow of uninterrupted, just really, completion and hearing the self and, imagination and execution and vision and all this stuff. And man, it's just such an incredibly powerful thing. That's why I tell people as a side note to like, it's really useful if you're a creator of some kind to batch things. Like don't write one thing for Instagram a day. Don't record one podcast a week or whatever like that. Don't write one newsletter. It's like sit down for several hours, write 10 or 15 social media posts all at once, then schedule them. Record a couple of podcasts, a week, or 3, 4, 5, 6 in a week or at a time, and then schedule those over time. Write a couple of newsletters at once and then schedule those over the course of 2 weeks. because whenever you're doing that, instead of getting in and out of this creative process, there's so much time and like energy and flow and stuff that's wasted on trying to get into the zone and then get out of the zone. And if you just get into the zone and do a bunch of the same thing all at once, you get a lot better results because you're so deep into that mindset and that creative flow. And then you can get out of that and then, get into something else. And then when it comes time again, get back in and do another batch of that work that you're trying to do. It's a really useful way I found to do a lot of work quickly and very deeply.
Speaking of work and your work specifically, I know a lot of your posts, I think in fact, most of them that I've seen, they're just like, heavy hitting like quotes and your thoughts just in a reel or in a tweet or whatever that you post online. What's been one, I'm sure there's been many, but if you could maybe like isolate one or maybe two that you've posted and you knew it was just a zinger, like you just like, it impacted a lot of people and you felt like super fulfilled about it. You're like, you know what? Like, I'm really happy that I shared this because of the feedback that I'm getting. Is there any, could you isolate a quote or two?
Yeah, let's see. The one that people seem to really, it always comes up is the same courage that it takes to leave behind what's not for you anymore is the same courage that will take you and lead you to what is. People really like that one because basically it addresses this problem that we've been talking about this whole podcast. And that is, we are scared to take a leap. We're scared to get out of the familiar, out of the comfortable and move into the unknown where we want to be. But it's the same self-trust and the same belief and courage of going like, okay, I'm going to make myself vulnerable and I'm going to try and find the thing that's really going to make me happy. That same part of yourself is the thing that's going to be there for you and will help you find where you need to go after you do the letting go. So I think that's probably why people like that one a lot.
I think that's a good place for us to end, man, because it kind of like, it really like encapsulates in a way what we've been discussing for the last, 47 minutes or so. And I just think it's a beautiful quote. And thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for coming on the podcast and just sharing your wisdom. I think my audience is going to really get a lot of value out of this.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great time.
You got it.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.